was neither real nor a threat to U.S. interest, what they determined was that UFO sightings could clog communication channels, that the Soviets might use this hysteria as a way of clogging our communication channels to launch a surprise attack. And that's what the big concern was. So in many ways, the people that were tasked to Blue Book were in fact responsible for trying to explain away the sightings. Later in 1950...
To stem the hysteria to some degree, so it could be capitalized on by the Soviets.
Exactly.
Okay.
That was their big concern initially. By 1955, another concern came up, and that was we had the development of the U-2 aircraft, which will tie in a little bit later to Area 51. It was developed out at that site. The U-2 aircraft was a high-flying reconnaissance, high-surveillance aircraft. As we know, in 1960, shot down over the Soviets, Gary Powers. Now, the first of these were silver in appearance. They weren't thinking too much about stealth at that time because nothing could shoot them down. They were so high. And they flew at between altitudes of between 50 and 60,000 feet. At the time, commercial aircraft only flew at 20 to 30,000 feet. So what you can imagine is you have this aircraft that's now flying higher than anything ever had before historically. And so people on the ground at dusk could look up and see something reflecting sunlight
or
at very
even
high altitudes.
At nighttime, because the sun going over the curvature of the Earth would be reflecting off of this craft. And so you've got this moving, flying, glowing craft in the middle of the night.
Very high altitude, very fast the first time they saw it. And so we have to step back and think through. I mean, the first satellites, Sputnik and things, were novel to people. And this was classified because the main purpose, remember Eisenhower denied that we were doing spy flights over the Soviet Union up until 1960, up until Gary Powers was shot down. And that's why Khrushchev embarrassed him. Because he exposed them, said we had them, and put them on public display.
So, Dr. Clark, what you're saying is that Project Blue Book is a reluctant effort by the Air Force, which is really concerned with strategic issues and defense of the nation. They're not concerned about the UFO threat because they don't see them as a military problem, except as the Soviet Union is going to use the hysteria. So strategically, they want to quell the hysteria and understate that issue. Plus, if I understand you correctly, they understood that most of these sightings that were unexplained were really their own aircraft. Right?
And that's the interesting part of this. The researchers talk about this later on in Project Blue Book. Fully 50% of the sightings in the mid-50s, mid to late 50s, were known U-2 flights.
Is that 50% of the Blue Book?
Yes, of the reported sightings that came in, fully 50% were known U-2 flights that they couldn't discuss. In fact, this explains a lot of the vague language that leads to conspiracy theories because they're trying to be ambiguous about what's going on, and they have to.
Yeah, I know one of the things that people have been very tight-lipped about, at least from official sources, is the is Area 51.
Yes.
Does Area 51 actually exist, or is this just kind of X-Files hysteria?
Well, there is a place, I'm not sure the official name. If you talk about Area 51 or Groom Lake, it is a dry lake bed called Groom Lake in the area in which this site is, this military installation. To give you an example of how vague people can be when they have clearances, how they try to be ambiguous about and dodge that problem, I talked to a person that I know in the Senate Armed Services Committee several years ago about Area 51, and as soon as I mentioned it, they tap danced around the whole subject and walked away from it. So I knew that it was a highly sensitive thing. One more example. I went to a conference at the Defense Intelligence Agency about 1997. And there was listed on top of one of the boards that we were at, and this was supposed to be an unclassified conference. And so none of us there or some had clearances, but a lot of us didn't. And there was this symbol TK that was there. And I went back and I asked some friends, they were in the government, and I said, what does this stand for? And 2 or 3 of them just refused to talk about it until someone told me, well, that's been released. 6 months ago, that name was declassified. That stands for Talent Keyhole, and that refers to a particular satellite, the KH-11 that we have in outer space, that looks like the Hubble Space Telescope, except is turned towards the Earth.
So there almost is a kind of, and one might say, appropriate paranoia about letting this information out, and so there's this cloud of secrecy that surrounds Area 51, but we actually know quite a bit about it. You mentioned that some work was done there in the Skunk Works, and a lot of these things were developed there.
There's been, if you do a little bit of research, the Federation of American Scientists have a website, and in fact you can see a picture, an overhead satellite imagery of Groom Lake. It's this dry lake bed that exists about 70 miles north, I believe, west of Las Vegas. A lot of engineers, aerospace engineers, go out there and commute daily from Las Vegas, or some live maybe on the base. It's got an area, it's within an area the size of about Connecticut, and this is where a lot of our top secret military research goes on, particularly for, in fact, the history has shown of the U-2, the SR-71, the Blackbird, which was a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, the B-2 bomber, the F-117 stealth fighter, and a bunch of UAVs, or unmanned aerial vehicles, that are now being produced. What you can do with UAVs is you can loft up whatever you need, send the information back digitally, and if it begins to crash or get taken,
Just blow it up.
Blow it up.
blow it up.
And so a lot of that's being researched out there now.
Well, a big question, though, about Area 51, Dr. Clark, is not so much what airplane is being developed right now, but what's being hidden at Area 51. And we mentioned a moment ago Roswell, but there's a lot of people that are convinced that a spaceship has crashed in the United States and with aliens on board, and these aliens have been transported to a secret place like Area 51. Is it realistic to think that we have alien spacecraft and alien beings in places like Area 51? And is the fact that we don't have proof of that, because there's speculation, of course, a lot in that area, is that in itself proof of a sophisticated cover-up by the government?
Well, that's the way conspiracy theories work. The absence of proof proves how well the conspiracy is working, right? But to take a step back, there are not that many people who actually believe aliens are being held or experimented on. There's a very small fraction of UFO researchers believe that, even those who are pro-UFO phenomena.
And why is that, Mark?
Because it's not credible. For the most part, a lot of the researchers that are putting that forward are not credible. They're not doing credible research. It's way too speculative.
And it discredits the other more
serious
legitimate
ones.
work that's being
Couldn't
done.
you also say it's giving way too much credit for our government's ability to hide secrets?
Well, there's the other part. One aerospace engineer who actually worked at Area 51 told me about, say, for example, the B-2 and the F-117. It's been argued by some that those are alien design, right? We copied the alien aircraft and now we've got them. Fiber optics is another one. But what they miss is that those are, and as a physicist you'll know what I'm talking about, these are evolutionary changes, not revolutionary ones. You would think that if it was truly this kind of alien aircraft that had all this technology and all this, we would make a quantum leap or a huge leap in our technology.
This would be a whole different technological paradigm that was introduced, okay?
The problem is the B-2 has got, if you've ever seen a B-2, it's rounded surfaces, and the F-117s has flat surfaces. Well, why is that? Because they were experimenting with different technologies that were already there from actually 1940s. During World War II, they were concerned about radar detection, and they thought about creating aircraft out of balsa wood or wood frames. And they could have done it, but they couldn't carry enough equipment and machines. So this idea has been around for a long time, and if you go back to the 60s or the 50s, we had the wing. Remember the flying wing?
Oh, yeah, right.
So that technology has been around.
And these are just small advancements, as it
small,
turns out.
incremental steps,
advancements, rather than the kind of thing you'd expect if it was a whole new technology introduced by an alien.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it depends on your perspective. If you were a Japanese, say, general in World War II, and you were not in on their secrets, because they had conducted some research on nuclear weapons, but let's say that you weren't involved in that, you would have been surprised and thought it a revolutionary change when the atomic bomb came on the scene. But to those people who worked all those years diligently on the Manhattan Project, and even physicists that knew about the atomic potential, before that, it would have been seen as small, incremental, evolutionary steps.
Well, what about the government's ability to maintain any conspiracy at all? And this seems to be a concern.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest, I think, myths about this. I mean, if you watch the television shows from the 70s, either the CIA is the most well-organized, conspiratorial, agency in the world, effective,
in world history.
in world history, or the most bumbling, foolish, and you get both perspectives. Why is that? Well, it's part of the absence of information. Again, the government is covering up, and they're doing it again, going back to what I talked about, I talked to different people in the government, and from those who work very seriously on these issues, they're very skittish about talking about these things, but others will talk about it. Tom Clancy's novels are all gotten information gleaned from people that work in government. So you can get the information, and that's the part of the problem. How do you keep this kind of thing secret? You would have to keep it secret between admirals and generals and politicians and Congress, between various agencies, between people who work there, between people who clean the place, janitors, everyone with a vested interest in making a buck off
So over a long period of time with all these people involved, something's going to slip out that's going to conclusively show the conspiracy to be what it is, a cover-up.
Especially in a free society.
Yeah.
And
Well, there's a vested interest by the fourth estate to expose this. There's a financial reward for all those people involved, and it was over,
press
as you said, over generations. This occurred. How would that secret be kept? No secret I'm aware of. No conspiracy has ever lasted that long.
Well, Dr. Clark, what you're saying, in summary here, is that you're saying the government does actually hide information from us. In
Yes.
that sense, you could say that's a conspiracy, but it's a conspiracy to maintain their security, their national security. But it's not a conspiracy to cover up UFOs. And in
Correct.
fact, such a conspiracy probably